Shgufta. I am now the founding director of Women on Wales, which I'll talk about in a little while. But a couple of years ago, I was the project manager at Al-Meezan, the climate change project. So Al-Meezan, for those of you who don't know, is a Muslim women's charity based in the south side of Glasgow for Muslim women and children, obviously, because women predominantly tend to have a kind of caring and parenting role originally. So the charity is all about Islamic teaching and Islamic learning, and it kind of started off many moons ago as like a study circle in somebody's house, and then it's kind of moved on and moved on and moved on. And around the time that we were delivering the project, there was about 1,500 registered users, and there was classes on a typical day, pretty much every day at the weekends, during the day, for every age group from 0 all the way through to whatever 100. Weekdays, most days there was something on. There was mother and toddler on, there was a play group on, there was an elderly ladies group one day a week, there was classes in Urdu, there was classes in Arabic, there was classes in English, evening classes, kids friendship club, which is a more kind of activities-based program, summer school, and then lots of kind of ad hoc speaker events. So it was a vibrant, budding kind of community organisation which I'd been part of for a couple of decades as a student, and then got involved in the climate change project. So in terms of what we were delivering, it was a kind of 4 strands of kind of typical climate change funded projects, climate challenge funded projects. So energy efficiency. So first of all, we were tasked with obviously getting our building more energy efficient through a number of means, and doing home visits. Now that was really, really interesting. We'd go into people's homes and, you know, they'd have the heating on full blast and the windows open in the middle of summer. So those were really, really interesting times. We also did quite a lot about food. I mean, I've just put very, very kind of minimal information on there. Obviously, there was lots that we could do. There's only 5. I've only got 5 minutes, but I could talk about it for hours. But predominantly food growing and food waste. But the Asian community is, I mean, most communities are very, typically everything is kind of revolved around food. So starting off with kind of food waste, which is obviously a big carbon contributor, and then kind of focusing on where food comes from and how you grow yourself and how about eating locally and seasonally. We also focused on resources, so the 5 Rs. We did lots of workshops with all the kind of classes, and we would hold regular swap shops, either kind of big events as part of like maybe Eid events or Ramadan events, or as part of when other things were happening. So there was a lot of discussions about it. Interestingly, the one thing I did notice in Swap Shop, the community was very keen on donating stuff, but not everybody was as keen on getting stuff from there, which I see typical behaviour actually. They're quite keen to kind of give stuff to charity, and they feel quite good about that somebody else is getting it, but they don't think to kind of buy secondhand or get secondhand. So quite interesting conversations. And the last area, which is my area of passion even till today, sustainable travel. So although we tried to encourage lots of other things, so electric cars, public transport and walking, etc. Public transport didn't really take off for the vast majority of people, but cycling did. So we did a lot of learn to ride for people who were complete beginners or getting back on a bike for the first time, since childhood. Lead rides, kind of getting confidence, some kind of basic bike maintenance classes, as well as training up our volunteers as cycle trainers and ride leaders. And in terms of an approach, we had a team of 8 people, including myself, and they were a real mixture of kind of Muslim and non-Muslim people. And my approach was always who was going to be best to be able to deliver in that community. I personally used a very kind of values-based approach, and I've done a number of workshops with Zarina from Sembo at the time about, you know, tapping into what values are important to people. So for example, when I first went into that community, we started off with energy efficiency and sustainable transport. The other stuff came later. And we were going in because the messaging that was coming out from EST was save money on your energy bill. So we were going in that message, and we very quickly realized that this is quite an affluent community. They weren't concerned about saving money. However, they were coming to the centre for faith-based teaching. And when we looked at the fact that our faith that tells us not to be wasteful, that had a much stronger impact. So we had to kind of change tack about what kind of messages, and it was very, very tailored to that specific community. We also found, unfortunately, that kind of typical environmental messaging didn't really work. So it was predominantly kind of faith-based teaching that we did. The 2 sources of the Muslim faith are the Quran Quran and prophetic narrations. And I mean, I've only picked out one of each to kind of demonstrate to you, but those are the typical things that we would do in our workshops, and we had posters around the shop. So for example, in the Quran, out of thousands of verses, there's 500 verses that are seen as being green, talking about not waste and kind of protecting the environment. And I've just placed the example of one, and it talks about man being placed on the earth as a vicegerent, as in fact, I think I've spelled that wrong, apologies. And it basically there as a protector of the earth, and our role is not to be able to come on the earth and use up all the resources and then go away and not think about future generations. And I think that's core to everything about sustainability, is to kind of make use of the valuable resources that are out there rather than being wasteful. And then there was lots of prophetic narrations. For example, there's one particularly that even when if you're doing ablution, which is like you wash kind of certain parts of your body before you go to prayer, even when you're doing that at a riverbank, that you don't waste water. And one of the companions asked, is there any wastage at a riverbank? And the Prophet said, yes, there is. So that just kind of shows you some of the messaging that we used. How we got different communities and different generations and different age groups connected was through food. Now, we found that food unites people, and obviously it starts off lots of conversations about wastage and where it comes from and how we grow our own, etc. We did obviously, when we kind of started off in our journey in a climate change project, not all of us were experts in that field. I know for me it was a steep learning curve, and in fact, a lot of my inspiration came from a book by Rianne von Ties, who is an environmentalist reaver, and it was called 199 Ways to Please God. And I thought it was a religious book when one of my colleagues bought me, and I thought to myself, goodness, how am I going to get this in expenses to the Scottish Government? Genuinely, that's what I thought. Until I read the book, and it went chapter by chapter into, for example, water and shopping and food and vegetables, and then what the Muslim faith says about each of them, and lots of examples. So I was able to use that in a lot of our workshops and conversations. In fact, I actually bought lots of copies of that book and gave it out to the teachers who were teaching the Quran and teaching various things, so that they could focus on those messages and when they were kind of doing the day-to-day Al-Meezan work. But we did use lots of kind of other people who were kind of experts in their field. So Energy Saving Trust, Bike Station, who are now known as Bike for Good, Young Scot Revolve, just to kind of name a few. So we got external people in to deliver events. And then I did an interfaith event, and it was about inviting people for different communities of different faiths, and also of people of no faith, to come together. And what we found at that event was that most of our beliefs were around sustainability and towards environmentalism and towards actions that counteract against climate change, so that there was actually more things that unite us than separate us. So that was kind of at the heart of everything that we did. So that is kind of Al-Meezan in a nutshell. I haven't kind of moved away from that world, although I've not been at Al-Meezan for a couple of years now. I'm now just launched Women on Wheels. It's a women's cycling charity for women, led by women. Our vision is one where it's an exclusive, we want it to be an inclusive community where women cycling is the norm, not the exception. We want to kind of empower and enable women to overcome their barriers, to take up cycling for no matter what, for the pure joy of it. And I've had to work really hard, actually, because the typical representation of women in cycling is not BEME women, and it's not women of colour. So I've had to do a lot of work around that. So I'm still using some of the tools that I learned at those times then. And a shameful plug, I'm really sorry, we're having a little lunch event for Women on Wheels this Friday in Glasgow for Glasgow-based projects. It's in Govan Hill. It's on 27th of May. I can send this post around to Jean-Mathieu, who can send it around. There'll be lots of exciting things. So please do share it with your communities and come along if you're local.